Welcome to the debate. Imagine you're hiring a lead project manager for, a critical high-stakes corporate launch.
Right, a launch where everything is on the line.
Exactly. And one candidate walks in and hands you this pristine, officially stamped project management certificate from a decade ago.
Okay.
But the other candidate hands you a messy, totally undocumented portfolio of complex projects they literally just built last week, but they lack any formal credentials whatsoever.
Yeah, which is incredibly common today.
It is. So which one of those actually proves capability? Today, we are diving deep into the Living Professional Record framework, often called the LPR system.
Mm-hmm.
And we're specifically focusing on this concept of evidence literacy.
It really is the ultimate tension in modern hiring and professional development. We are all desperately trying to figure out what is real in this absolute sea of manufactured resumes.
Yes, exactly. So the central question we are debating today is this. Do credentials, degrees, licenses, certificates, badges, do they carry inherent professional meaning about a worker's capabilities, or do they merely verify a bounded historical fact?
Right.
I will argue that credentials serve as vital, objectively verified anchors that definitively substantiate baseline professional claims.
And I will contend that while credentials are inherently limited facts that often honestly, dangerously obscure the true meaning, maturity, and context of a professional's actual lived work.
Look, we really have to start with source strength here. Within the LPR framework, every piece of evidence is evaluated based on how strong or how trustworthy the source is.
Sure.
To me, credentials matter deeply because they represent the absolute highest level of source strength for specific facts. Right now, the market is absolutely drowning in what the LPR system calls prior renderings.
Oh, absolutely drowning.
Right? And if you're a listener thinking about your own career, prior renderings are your old resume bullets. They're your fluffed up LinkedIn bio or, those slick AI-generated cover letters.
Or polished interview talking points. But the thing is, those are claims, not evidence.
Exactly. A claim is just a statement asking the reader to believe something. I know artificial intelligence, or I am a transformative leader.
I manage large budgets. We hear it all the time.
Right, and without evidence, they are just air. A degree earned, a license issued, or an industry standard met, that provides an irreplaceable, objectively verified baseline.
A baseline, sure.
Right? Because unlike a client's personal memory, which is, notoriously fallible and biased, or a job posting, which just tells you what a company wanted in theory, a credential is an objective artifact. It firmly supports foundational claims. If you have a credential that says you completed an introductory AI course, that is an unassailable, verified anchor in a sea of subjective narrative. It proves the event occurred.
I understand the appeal of that bedrock. We all want certainty, right?
Of course.
But while credentials verify that an event occurred, they are profoundly limited because they only prove what the LPR framework calls a bounded fact. Look, credentials prove facts, not meaning.
But a fact is a pretty fantastic place to start, wouldn't you agree?
It is a starting point, yes. But a credential proves a procedural reality, not an actual professional capability. Yes, a degree was earned. Yes, a license was issued. But it does not automatically prove the whole meaning of the work.
Okay, but
it does not prove mature capability. It does not prove current practice. A certificate from 10 years ago tells us absolutely nothing about a worker's judgment under pressure today.
That's true, but it's still evidence.
Sure, but think about the transferability of that knowledge into a chaotic corporate environment. To use a scenario right out of the core LPR principles, a project management certificate may prove that the client completed project management training.
Right.
But it absolutely does not, by itself, prove that the client can lead a complex project across departments. The danger is that the market, and sometimes the advisor, looks at the certificate and simply assumes the capability.
Yeah.
That larger claim requires entirely different, much more complex evidence.
And this is really the core of our disagreement today. If a credential leaves a gap between the training and the real-world capability, how do we handle that space? Like, how is a credential actively utilized when formulating these professional claims?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The problem isn't just a theoretical gap, It is an active systemic hazard in how we evaluate talent.
A hazard?
Yes, clients routinely use a bounded credential to make a wildly unsupported leap. And frankly, if you are listening to this and thinking, well, obviously a weakened certificate doesn't make someone an expert.
Which most people would think.
Right, but you have to remember how often the market actively encourages this exact leap of logic. Someone earns a digital badge from a weekend seminar. They hold up that certificate, and suddenly they are claiming to be an AI transformation leader.
Right, okay, they are overclaiming.
Massively overclaiming, without additional evidence without proof of execution. Relying on the credential creates what the LPR system accurately calls generic professionalism.
Generic professionalism.
Yeah, it's the illusion of competence. The credential becomes a shield. It prevents the advisor or the hiring manager from asking the necessary probing questions.
Like what?
Like, what did you actually build? Who relied on it? What went catastrophically wrong? And how did you fix it? The badge actually shuts down the evidence inquiry rather than starting it, because everyone breathes a sigh of relief and says, well, they have the paper, so they must know what they are doing.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. The danger you are describing is entirely real, I agree, but you are blaming the credential for the failure of the interpreter.
Am I?
Yes. The problem isn't the credential itself. It is the lack of discipline in how the claim is mapped. Think of a credential like a property deed.
Okay, a property deed.
Now, a property deed doesn't tell you the condition of the house. It doesn't tell you if the roof leaks, if the foundation is cracked, or if the plumbing is shot. But it indisputably proves ownership.
Right.
You wouldn't throw away a property deed just because it lacks architectural nuance.
Sure, you own the land, but if I am hiring you to build a skyscraper on it, the deed tells me absolutely nothing about the soil composition.
Well,
I mean, a deed is useless for engineering.
but you can't even get on the land to test the soil without the deed. An LPR advisor must use the credential strictly for the truthful, bounded claim it supports. It secures the foundational fact.
But is the fact enough?
Take a project manager. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah has her PMP certification. As an advocate for credentials, I am saying that piece of paper is gold because it proves, objectively, that she understands the baseline methodology.
Okay, baseline methodology.
Completed rigorous project management certification, that is a highly valuable, highly trustworthy claim. If Sarah wants to claim she is a crisis turnaround specialist, then yes, the advisor demands more evidence.
Exactly.
But dismissing the vital utility of the credential because people occasionally overclaim is like, throwing out your compass because you don't like the terrain. It secures the baseline so you can safely explore the rest.
But the terrain is the entire point. If we are trying to map a living professional record, the deed to the house is literally the least interesting part of the worker's value.
Is it?
Yes, it's a box-checking exercise. You are prioritizing objective proof over what actually makes a professional capable, which is what we call operational texture.
Okay, define operational texture for our listeners, because I think this is where the debate really hinges. Sure. A credential fundamentally lacks operational texture. Real professional meaning requires knowing the conditions under which a skill was actually used in the wild.
In the wild, meaning on the job.
Right. What were the constraints? What was the budget? Who was involved? What were the consequences of failure? In the LPR system, we operate on the premise that skills are claims. So if someone says, I am adaptable or I am strategic, a certificate cannot prove those skills were successfully deployed in a high-stakes environment. A digital badge doesn't tell me how you handled a stakeholder who fundamentally misunderstood the project scope.
Or who tried to derail your timeline.
Exactly. Only operational texture, the rich, messy, detailed process of the work itself, makes a professional's evidence interpretable and, frankly, trustworthy. But wait, if a client provides a highly textured narrative about navigating that difficult stakeholder, but lacks any formal, verified evidence, isn't that just a really detailed story?
It is a detailed story, yes. But in the LPR system, memory is a legitimate starting point for an evidence inventory. Memory leads to artifacts.
A starting point, sure. But memory is not verified evidence. That is my fundamental contention with prioritizing your operational texture over objective proof.
I'm not prioritizing it over proof. I'm saying it is the proof of the capability.
But I'm not denying the value of texture. Knowing the constraints, the decisions, the sequences, that makes a claim readable and human. But operational texture often relies heavily on personal memory or unverified, what the framework calls measure clues.
Measure clues are highly valuable indicators.
But let's clarify what they are. When a client sits down and says, "I saved the department a lot of time," or "I led a major initiative that increased revenue,"
Right.
those are just measure clues. They are fuzzy personal estimates, not hard, verified metrics. Without an objective anchor, without a credential, a verified project record, a formal artifact, that highly textured narrative is just floating in the ether.
That's a bit harsh.
But human beings are notoriously unreliable narrators of their own success. We inflate our own importance, we forget who actually wrote the code, we misremember the timeline.
Well, sure, memory is flawed.
The objective anchor of a credential is necessary to establish baseline trust. It verifies that the individual is actually in the room, taking the course, holding the certification, before we begin indulging in the unverified texture of how heroically they supposedly performed.
You are setting up a false dichotomy here between floating, ego-driven stories and rigid, trustworthy credentials.
How so?
Gathering operational texture doesn't mean just taking their word for it and writing it down as fact. It means pushing the client to recover the operating reality around the event. It means the advisor acts almost like an investigative journalist.
Okay, an investigative journalist.
Yeah. They ask, communication between whom? What information was missing? What did you create or change to fix it? Who relied on the new process? What happened after you implemented it?
Right.
That rigorous process moves the client from that generic professionalism, the illusion of competence, to grounded professionalism. The credential doesn't do that. The credential just says they were there.
But again, being there is the prerequisite for everything else. In a marketplace flooded with AI-generated resumes and incredibly sophisticated professional services, verifying that someone actually passed the threshold standard is an incredibly powerful mechanism of trust.
Powerful, perhaps, but dangerous if it stops the inquiry. Which brings us to the practical discipline of the LPR advisor.
Okay.
Because theoretical danger is one thing. What happens when an advisor is actually sitting across from a client who is aggressively waving a weekend seminar badge in their face? How do they handle that evidence?
Exactly. How does the advisor govern this evidence in the real world?
I come at it from a different way. When a client hands an advisor a certificate, the advisor's primary duty is not to celebrate the acquisition of a bounded fact.
Right, that's just step one.
The advisor must immediately ask, what does this credential prove? And, more importantly, what does this credential not prove?
Right. What claim can it responsibly support?
Exactly. What additional evidence is needed for a stronger claim? The advisor must force the client to look past the badge. They have to hunt for work products, witness feedback, project notes, and actual outcomes.
And if they don't?
If you only secure the bounded fact, you are doing a massive disservice to the complexity of the worker's experience. The advisor's job is to ask, where did this skill actually show up in real work? If the advisor doesn't push for that context, the client's record remains shallow and generic.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I am not suggesting the advisor simply files the certificate and calls it a day.
Okay.
But I firmly believe the advisor's first job is source governance, identifying exactly what claim the credential can responsibly support and securing that claim immediately.
Securing it, sure.
An advisor shouldn't dismiss the certificate in the hunt for deeper, richer meaning. If they do, there is a very real danger of underclaiming.
Underclaiming? We've been talking about overclaiming this whole time.
Yes, underclaiming. Ignoring evidence the client hasn't learned to recognize or value. If an advisor gets too obsessed with finding the perfect, highly textured narrative, they might overlook the immense value of the clean, verifiable facts the client already possesses.
Well,
We must secure the bounded fact first to prevent underclaiming a client's verified achievements. Furthermore, when you push so aggressively for operational texture, you are ignoring one of the most critical constraints in the entire LPR system, which is proof is not permission.
The privacy boundary, yes, that is a significant factor.
It is a massive factor. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a software developer working at a major fintech startup. You want operational texture.
Right, I want to see the code they wrote.
Exactly. You want the internal architectural reports, the before and after latency metrics, the witness observations from their engineering manager. But in the LPR framework, evidence-rich does not mean evidence exposed.
That's true.
That developer might have an internal report that perfectly proves their strategic capability and provides incredible operational texture, but it contains proprietary algorithmic logic, or employer-owned code, or confidential financial data.
Right, which they can't share.
It is fundamentally unsafe to use externally. Credentials, on the other hand, are clean. They are public by design. They do not violate personnel, legal, or security boundaries.
Yeah.
When you demand raw operational texture, you are often walking the client right up to the edge of unsafe exposure. The credential is the safe harbor.
I don't disagree that privacy is a massive constraint. Proof is not permission is a core tenet we must respect. We never expose sensitive material just to prove a point. A developer shouldn't risk a lawsuit to prove they know Python.
Thank you.
But the LPR system accounts for this without retreating entirely to the safety of a generic badge. If a highly textured artifact is confidential, the advisor doesn't just throw up their hands and say, well, let's just use your generic coding certificate instead.
So what do they do? If the texture is locked behind a non-disclosure agreement, how do you map it?
They use safe summaries. They create metadata-only descriptions. They redact the artifact.
Oh, sure.
The advisor works with the client to create a generalized claim supported by a private note in the record. The complexity of handling sensitive evidence is absolutely not an excuse to fall back on a credential that fails to prove the actual capability.
But a safe summary is inherently a weaker form of evidence than the original document. By definition, if you are stripping away the specific data, you are stripping away the verification.
Well, it relies on context.
It relies on the reader trusting the summary. The credential does not require trust, it requires verification. It is mathematically binary. You either have the PMP certification or you don't. You either have the degree or you don't.
It verifies a fundamentally weaker claim. Let's go back to your property deed analogy.
Okay.
Yes, the deed proves you own the land safely and publicly without exposing your private bank records. But again, if someone is hiring you to build that skyscraper, the deed is insufficient.
Sure.
A credential is often entirely useless for determining if a worker can actually execute a complex strategy in a high-risk environment. The advisor must evaluate evidence in relation to the specific claim being made. Evidence strength is always claim-specific.
I agree completely that source strength is claim-specific. If the claim is, I have a degree in computer science, the degree is the strongest possible evidence. It is a one-to-one match.
Yes.
If the claim is, I can architect a scalable database for a Fortune 500 company, the degree is merely a supporting detail. But, and this is critical, that supporting detail is still structurally necessary. Without it, the foundation of the larger claim is suspect.
I would argue it is not always structurally necessary. Think about the modern workforce. Some of the most capable professionals in emerging fields like decentralized finance or emerging AI prompt engineering have profound operational texture and zero formal credentials.
Zero?
Zero. The credentials don't even exist yet. Their evidence inventory is entirely comprised of work samples, public GitHub repositories, and witness feedback.
That's a fair point.
Is overly anchored to waiting for a credential to validate the reality of the work, they will completely fail to map the true capabilities of unconventional workers.
That is an edge case, albeit a very important one. But for the vast majority of professionals, their record is a combination of both. And my position remains that the credential is the anchor that prevents the record from drifting into fiction.
Well,
let's look at how the advisor actually processes this in practice. When an advisor is mapping evidence to claims, they're usually looking at those prior renderings first, the old resume bullets.
right.
For instance, a bullet that says, led cross-functional process improvement. We both agree that statement, on its own, is not evidence. It is merely a claim lead. Correct.
It is a prior rendering. It is a ghost of a claim. It must be checked against actual source material to become real.
Right. Now, if the source material is just the client sitting across the desk saying, yes, I did that, it was really hard, here are the measure clues of how much time I think I saved, we are still dealing in claims, even if they are highly textured claims.
Technically, yes.
If the source material includes a verified credential in Lean Six Sigma, we suddenly have an objective mechanism that validates the theoretical framework the client claims to have applied.
It validates the framework, yes.
The credential doesn't prove the specific amount of time saved, I grant you that, but it proves the client actually possesses the methodology they claim to have utilized. It grounds the texture in reality.
It grounds the vocabulary. It proves they know the words. It does not prove they know the music. Look, I am not suggesting we discard credentials entirely. They absolutely have a place in the LPR framework.
Good, I'm glad we agree on that.
But we must be fiercely, unrelentingly rigorous about their boundaries. A credential proves a bounded procedural fact. The danger in the modern professional landscape is the overwhelming temptation from hiring managers, from software platforms, from workers themselves, to let the credentials speak for the meaning of the work.
It is a temptation.
The advisor's highest calling is to resist that temptation, to sit with the client and systematically unpack the operational reality. What was broken? Who was involved? What did you actually do?
Right.
That process is messy. It involves grappling with privacy boundaries and faulty memory, but it is the only genuine way to arrive at professional truth.
And I would summarize my position by reasserting that without the bedrock of verifiable objective facts, professional truth is merely a compelling narrative.
And narrative, yes.
Credentials represent the unassailable, verified bedrock of evidence, provided they are mapped to the correct, appropriately bounded claim. They protect against both the inflation of the ego and the fading of memory. They are the fixed points by which the rest of the professional record can be safely navigated.
So, we arrive at an ongoing intellectual tension. We have the absolute security of verified, bounded facts on one side, and the absolute necessity of interpreting the complex, highly textured reality of a worker's actual lived experience on the other.
Indeed, the tension between the objective anchor and the subjective narrative is the very heartbeat of the LPR system. As we've seen, evaluating source strength is highly dependent on the specific claim being made.
Absolutely.
There is so much more to explore within this framework, particularly how an advisor conducts a full evidence inventory to balance these competing demands and handle professional truth safely.
It requires incredible judgment. You cannot simply look at a piece of paper and check a box.
You really can't, which brings us back to where we started. A credential might give you the exact verified coordinates of a professional at a specific moment in time, but coordinates alone don't build the skyscraper.
No, they don't.
We have the foundation, but the true task of the living professional record is discovering what the professional can actually build upon it.